The first $1 million he ever earned was made before most people finished their morning coffee. Yet 5 years earlier, he had been sleeping in the back seat of a broken delivery van with less than $20 to his name. The strange part wasn't how he became wealthy. The strange part was that it all began because of a forgotten notebook no one else wanted. Before we go any further, I want to know where you're watching from today. Leave your country in the comments below, because these financial case files reach viewers from every corner of the world, and I'd love to see where this story finds you. In the industrial outskirts of a crowded river city, lived a 34-year-old delivery driver named Elias Mercer. Every day looked exactly like the one before it. His alarm rang long after sunrise because he spent most nights accepting extra delivery routes just to afford fuel, cheap meals, and the minimum payment on debts that seemed to grow faster than he could earn. By the time he started his engine each afternoon, successful people had already finished important meetings, while he was only beginning another exhausting race against unpaid bills. He delivered expensive furniture into luxury homes he could never imagine owning. He carried designer watches worth more than his annual income. He watched entrepreneurs sign invoices larger than his monthly salary without thinking twice. Then he climbed back into his aging van and wondered how two people could live in the same city but exist in completely different financial worlds. Elias wasn't lazy. In fact, he worked harder than almost everyone he knew. What he lacked wasn't effort, it was direction. Every extra hour he worked bought him another day of survival, but never a better future. It felt like running on a treadmill that charged interest every time he slowed down. The debt collectors called almost daily. His landlord had stopped believing promises. Friends gradually disappeared because every invitation ended with the same answer: maybe next month. Deep inside, Elias feared there would never be a next month that looked any different from today. One rainy evening, his delivery route took him to an abandoned office building scheduled for demolition. Most businesses had moved out weeks earlier, leaving broken furniture, dusty filing cabinets, and forgotten boxes scattered across empty floors. While waiting for a customer to sign paperwork, Elias wandered into what had once been the executive offices. Everything valuable had already been removed except one wooden bookshelf leaning against the wall. On the bottom shelf sat a weathered leather notebook covered in dust. There was no title, no company logo, just faded initials pressed into the cover. Curious, Elias opened the first page expecting meaningless scribbles. Instead, he found a handwritten sentence that stopped him cold. Poor people sell their mornings. Wealthy people invest them before anyone else can buy them. He frowned. It sounded less like motivation and more like a warning. As he turned another page, he discovered dated entries spanning nearly 20 years. They weren't diary entries. They were detailed records of tiny decisions, early morning routines, business observations, investment calculations, negotiation notes, and financial experiments that seemed almost impossible to believe. Whoever wrote this notebook had quietly built enormous wealth, starting with almost nothing. Then something even stranger caught his attention. Folded between two pages was an old newspaper clipping showing the smiling face of a billionaire industrialist who had vanished from public life more than a decade earlier. Across the photograph, written in black ink, were 6 chilling words. "They never discovered how I started." Elias barely slept that night. The notebook rested on the small table beside his mattress, like a locked vault filled with secrets. Before dawn, curiosity defeated exhaustion. At exactly 5 o'clock, while the city outside remained silent, he opened the notebook again. The next pages did not contain motivational quotes or lucky shortcuts. They contained financial observations written with the precision of someone who had spent decades studying how ordinary people unknowingly traded away opportunities. The anonymous author claimed that fortunes were rarely built during busy afternoons filled with interruptions. They were designed in the quiet hours before the rest of the world began competing for attention. Every chapter of the notebook ended with the same instruction: protect the first 2 hours of every day as if they were ownership shares in your future. Elias decided to test the idea. He reorganized his entire schedule, sacrificing late-night entertainment, endless scrolling, and unnecessary conversations. Each morning before sunrise, he studied business reports from public companies, learned financial statements, practiced negotiation techniques, and wrote down every business idea that crossed his mind. He didn't earn a single extra dollar during those first weeks, but something far more valuable began to happen. He started seeing opportunities hidden inside his ordinary delivery routes. Restaurants throwing away usable equipment, small manufacturers struggling because they tracked inventory with paper records, local shop owners paying unnecessary costs simply because no one had shown them a better system. The city had not changed. Elias had. His mornings had quietly trained his eyes to notice money flowing where everyone else saw routine. Weeks later, he proposed a simple inventory solution to the owner of a family-run furniture supplier he visited every Thursday. The owner dismissed him with a polite smile, yet 3 days later called him back after realizing the idea could save thousands each month. It became Elias's first paid consulting project. The payment was modest, but it proved something extraordinary. Knowledge could produce income without requiring more physical labor. For the first time in his life, money had come from his mind instead of his muscles. If you're enjoying uncovering financial case files like this one, subscribe to Night Library Archive so you never miss the next hidden story of wealth built in unexpected ways. As the weeks became months, Elias filled notebook after notebook with his own observations, adding them beside the mysterious author's writings. His confidence grew, his debts began shrinking, and small consulting jobs slowly replaced extra delivery shifts. Then, on an unusually cold morning, he reached the final page of the original notebook. There was no conclusion, no signature, only a handwritten address on the outskirts of the city and one final instruction. If you are reading this, do not tell anyone about these pages until you have visited this place. The fortune was never the real inheritance. The address belonged to a warehouse scheduled to be demolished within 48 hours. When Elias arrived, demolition crews had already surrounded the property with barriers, but parked outside was a black sedan with tinted windows. Before he could step closer, two sharply dressed strangers walked toward him. One of them looked directly at the notebook tucked beneath his arm and quietly said, "We've been looking for that book for 11 years. Hand it over, and you can pretend none of this ever happened." Elias refused. Instead of handing over the notebook, he demanded the truth. The strangers admitted they had once worked for the billionaire whose name appeared in the newspaper clipping. Before disappearing, their employer had left only one instruction: the notebook must belong to the first person who discovered its value without chasing money. Elias had passed the final test. Inside the warehouse, hidden behind a false wall, was no vault of cash and no chest of gold. There were shelves filled with journals, market research, business strategies, investment lessons, and decades of practical financial knowledge. The billionaire had never intended to leave behind wealth. He intended to leave behind the ability to create it. Over the following years, Elias used those lessons to build several small companies, invested patiently, and eventually earned far more than he had ever imagined. He never forgot the mornings that changed everything. Every day before sunrise, while the world was still asleep, he continued studying, planning, and improving, because he understood that discipline compounds just like money. The greatest investment was never the notebook. It was the person he became because of it. The lesson is simple. Wealth is rarely created by working more hours. It is created by investing your best hours in skills, knowledge, and decisions that keep paying you long after the work is done. If this case file changed the way you think about money and success, leave a like, tell me what country you're watching from, and subscribe to Night Library Archive. Then click the next case file on your screen, because the next financial secret is already waiting for you.